Today on The Divide, a rift in the GOP pitting Trump's loyal base against those ready to move on. Could a third party emerge?
For too long, too many good people have tried to hold the party together just out of party loyalty.
Also, a bill most state lawmakers seem to agree on but can't seem to pass. The push, once again, to fund our efforts to better fight Washington's wildfires.
Do the forest restoration work. Make our communities more resilient, which will reduce the overall cost year after year.
Plus, Senator Ted Cruz, back from sunny Cancun, gets a cool reception in Texas. Why the hypocrisy of our elected leaders often brings out hypocrisy of our own. That and more as we attempt to bridge the divide. Hello and welcome to The Divide. Y'all knew we were going to talk about Ted Cruz today. Is that my best Texas accent? I'll put it on later, but we have other stuff to get to first. There's a storm brewing in the Republican Party, one that could bring a wave of Democratic dominance if the GOP can't get its base together. A prospect looking more and more bleak by the day, given the growing divide between leaders like Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and former President Donald Trump.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president.
After the impeachment trial, McConnell came out and blamed Trump for the insurrection, despite voting not to convict. The former president, after hearing what Mitch McConnell had to say, released a blistering statement in so many words vowing payback. Trump writing, "The Republican Party can never again be respected or strong with political leaders like Senator Mitch McConnell at its helm. Where necessary and appropriate, I will back primary rivals who espouse making America great again and our policy of America first." In our state, that could mean an effort by Trump to oust two Republican members of Congress who voted to impeach him, Congressman Dan Newhouse and Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler. Both are up for re-election in the all-important midterms next year. While both supported the president, both voted to remove him given the events of January 6th. In an op-ed this week, I warned that Republican voters in our state, more specifically voters who are loyal to the former president, risk handing those two red seats in Congress off to Democrats in 2022 if they choose to punish Newhouse and Herrera Butler for impeachment. Meanwhile, there are some who believe the GOP is beyond repair and think it is time for a third party to emerge. These are conversations that are actively and seriously underway behind the scenes. I spoke with former state GOP chair Chris Vance, who left the party over his dislike for Donald Trump. He is part of a group of current and former politicians debating a new path forward. You and I think, seem to be in agreement that the GOP as it is right now cannot survive. You know, you have this fractured party, but more than that, you have this fractured base, a big chunk of which remains very loyal to the former president. There have been some conversations about a third party. Would this be a brand new platform and everything, third party, centrist, or would this be a party that represents the core principles of the Republican Party, but just by a different name?
What we're talking about specifically, and there have been meetings and discussions that I've been a part of, is creating either a new party or a distinct competing faction within the Republican Party. But Brandy, either way, the key thing is this. We're not talking about forming a pathetic little third party. We're talking about prominent Republicans, maybe even currently elected Republicans, splitting off from the party, breaking up the party, and creating something new. That's what could happen.
Well, so give me some names. You've been part of these internal conversations. Who's involved?
Well, I'm not going to out anybody whose name hasn't been mentioned in the media, but you've seen Evan McMullin, Miles Taylor, Charlie Dent, former member of Congress, There's a number of other former Republican members of Congress, Republican ambassadors like Jim Glassman, Bush officials like John Mitnick, a number of former state legislators. So there are a lot of prominent Republicans involved, and there are some discussions going on with current Republican members of Congress.
Yeah, because no offense to the gentlemen whose names you listed, I know they've had contributions to politics, but they aren't exactly heavy hitters currently in the political system. So are there people who are currently major names in Congress who you say would split off?
Not yet, not that I can confirm, but in Arkansas today, a Republican leader in the state Senate left the party, became an independent, and is forming something new in Arkansas. In California, the former leader of the California Republicans in the Assembly, Assemblyman Chad Mays, left the party and is now an independent. So you're starting to see Republicans, even currently elected Republicans, leave and are looking for something new. I'm not saying that the Republican Party should change. They're not going to listen to me. Instead, Republicans, and I think it's a minority of Republicans, but Republicans who are looking for something new and different and they don't want to be Democrats, but they want something new. That's the home that we need to try and provide for them.
Do you think that Jamie Herrera Butler and Dan Newhouse can keep their seats, given that they voted for impeachment?
I think they can. I think they're going to have a hell of a fight. And Dan's fight is going to be tougher because the 4th congressional district is several percentage points more Republican than the 3rd. The top 2 primary, as opposed to a closed party primary, helps them. But it's no secret. They know I feel this way. I would love to see those 2 people leave the Republican Party, run under a new banner in 2022. They are good people. And I just fundamentally, I don't believe that Jamie Herrera Butler and Marjorie Taylor Greene can be in the same party. It's absurd. It is just absurd. A tent can sometimes get so big that it's ridiculous. And good, decent, principled, center-right Republicans need to leave this party.
I want to ask you on that note, good, decent, principled. I want to talk about what's happening at the Lincoln Project quickly, because I think, as you guys embark on this effort to elect people who are good, decent, and principled, the Lincoln Project is under a lot of scrutiny right now. First, let me just ask, do you still affiliate with them?
I was one of the original senior advisors, and I still am a senior advisor. We've had some meetings and calls about the direction of the organization. Those of us at the senior advisory level had nothing to do with the day-to-day operations. I've never met John Weaver. I've never been in the Lincoln Project offices. They know they've got to change. They made another announcement today about bringing in someone to lead a transition committee. A lot of the old leadership, both staff and consultants, are gone. Lincoln Party screwed up big time. They know it, and they're trying to fix it. Lincoln Project.
And for people who are listening, we're talking about sexual harassment allegations against co-founder John Weaver and some other accusations of just sort of a toxic environment at the Lincoln Project. George Conway and some others have said that the Lincoln Project just needs to disband, that it's over and can't be effective. What do you say to that?
In my mind, if they weren't trying to change, if they weren't making the changes they're making, if they just stubbornly insisted that everything they did was okay, then I would agree with that. But they're bringing in an outside legal counsel to examine what they did wrong with the sexual harassment issues. They've got all new staff leadership, and they are trying to completely change their culture. The mission is critical. I mean, we need the Lincoln Project to continue to fight against Trump and Trumpism, but they've got to fix their own house internally. They've promised me they're going to do that, so at least for now, I'm sticking with them.
Let me just close with this, Chris. We're only a month removed from Donald Trump leaving office. Is it too soon to be contemplating, an overhaul of the party or splitting off from the party, something that would fundamentally change the political landscape in this country? Ought you give it maybe a little time to see whether his hold on the party and on the base wanes?
No, not in my mind. I mean, but I'm someone who I was advocating that the party should split back in the spring of 2016. Donald Trump should never have been allowed to become the nominee of the Republican Party. And when he did, principled conservatives should have walked out of the 2016 convention. I mean, all thinking people have known who and what Donald Trump is from the moment he came down that golden escalator and running for president. For too long, too many good people have tried to hold the party together just out of party loyalty, and that's got to stop. I mean, we cannot allow Donald Trump to ever win another election, or people like him to win another election in this country. We may not survive it. So in my mind, I mean, I don't know how many more times we have to be proven to us that the Republican base and most Republican electeds are absolutely loyal to Trump. I mean, how many more times does that need to be proven? Well, this should have happened a long time ago. I'm glad that it's at least starting to happen now. But with that being said, nothing is certain. It's all very fluid. It may come to nothing, but there are serious discussions going on right now.
And your message to the ride or die Trump supporters who think you're full of it?
Go ahead. Stick with, I mean, I'd say this to people all the time. You won. You won. You took control of the Republican Party. You drove us Reagan Bush types out. It's your party now. I'm not trying to take it away from you, but I'm saying that everybody who, all the rest who are not comfortable with that reality should leave. Stop trying to hold it together.
Yeah, and look, I know that there are some of you watching who are loyal and support the former president. And this isn't meant to alienate or isolate you. But, you know, I hear these comments from people about Jamie Herrera Butler, about Dan Newhouse, and other people who are not loyal to the president, that they're rhinos. You know, the automatic thing is if they don't support the president, then they're rhinos. They're not real Republicans. But in the case of Herrera Butler and Dan Newhouse, if there is this split and pro-Trump voters refuse to vote for them over impeachment, you won't get rhinos. You will get actual Democrats in those two congressional seats. So I think it's just something to think of for voters as we approach the 2022 midterms, which will be here before we know it. All right, coming up after the break. Don't let the snow on the ground fool you. We are not far from wildfire season, and the state's Commissioner of Public Lands is hoping state lawmakers will keep that in mind as they consider a bill to help battle those blazes. Also, politicians will be politicians. Oh, Ted Cruz. After a year of so much hypocrisy, the only thing we can control is how we respond to that hypocrisy. Stick around. I know it's hard to think about wildfire season after that big blizzard we had. We still have snow on the ground at my place, but the wildfire season is going to be here before we know it. For several years now, Commissioner of Public Lands Hilary Franz has been pushing state lawmakers to come up with a dedicated funding source to better prevent and battle these fires that we are seeing with increasing frequency every year. We've had her on the show several times to talk about this, including ahead of last year's legislative session.
To me, it's my #1 responsibility to make sure on my watch that we are doing everything possible to keep them safe, to get their homes and their communities more resilient, the forest more resilient, but also have the resources to put those fires out quickly and protect them.
Now, that effort stalled in 2020 in part because there is disagreement over whether additional money for this should come from a new dedicated funding source like a tax or from existing money that we already have. While that same debate is taking place this year, the bill is gaining some traction. I spoke with Franz once again as she once again urges lawmakers not to wait a minute longer. So at this point, what is the funding source for this, or when would that be identified?
So right now we built a comprehensive bill that is going to tackle the 3 most significant investments needing to be made to change the trajectory on, as you say, to prevent the new normal. And that is wildfire response, the air resources, the firefighters, the equipment we need at the local and state level. forest restoration, which we know our forests are dying and it's leading to these catastrophic fires. Over 1.25 million acres we need to treat just in central and eastern Washington. And third is community resilience, giving our communities that are on the front lines of these fires a fighting chance against them so we don't have another tragedy like Malden. Everyone in the legislature agrees about what those three buckets need to be funded if we're going to change the trajectory on. Where there is an agreement is on how we're going to pay for it. So what we've done this year is instead of deciding what it should be for the legislature, we've invited the legislature to work with us. They know best the challenges they have in finding revenue and also generating revenue, given their experience and expertise. So we invited a bipartisan group of legislators to help us problem solve. And it may not just be one funding source. It could be a number of different funding sources. My number one job is to get this over the finish line. And we put forward a bill that is comprehensive and the right things that need to be funded. And now we're going to work with the legislature to find the funding sources to get it over the finish line.
The last go around when we discussed this, you wanted it to be a tax on homeowners insurance that would provide this dedicated funding stream to really tackle the wildfire situation in our state. Do you believe that that's off the table, or is that a route that the legislature could still go?
It is not off the table. We put forward this year to the bipartisan group of legislators in the House and Senate around 25 different potential funding sources, right? And some of those were non-starters and we quickly removed them off the list. And then others have stayed up on the list as ones to be focused on. The insurance surcharge is one of those that would put a fee basically on home and property and auto insurance. Around last year, we proposed a $5 surcharge, which if you're a homeowner with one home and two cars, $15 a year. That is still on the table. It may not be $5. It could be $1. It may, at the end of the day, not be the funding source. I mean, I think one of the things that makes this bill so strong is that we have a bipartisan sponsorship. So prime sponsor, Representative Larry Springer, and Representative Kretz, both who have come together to say, we're going to work tirelessly to do everything we can to not let this die in a floor fight or die in a bipartisan debate, but instead lift it up as the priority it should be.
That being said, who do you need more support from right now, Republicans or Democrats? Who are we going to talk to for the next 1 minute, 43 seconds?
We need both sides.
Both? Do you have detractors on both sides?
We need the Republican and Democratic leadership in the House and the Senate to say, this is a priority. While the skies are gray and snow has fallen and rain is here, we're not going to forget what we just lived through in 2020, the lives that have been lost over the last 5+ years, the number of properties that have been destroyed, the damage and the destruction. We as a legislative body, Republicans and Democrat, East and West legislators, are going to come together and make this the priority that our communities and our public have said it should be. And frankly, they're going to come forward to say, every year our firefighters put their lives on the line. And it's time for us to have their back and do something for them to give them a fighting chance since they've been fighting for us every single year, month after month.
And to that point, you know, in part, this has been a problem of priorities, and it always seems like there's something else big on the legislature's plate. And there probably will be every year. I mean, maybe not to the extent of a once-in-a-century pandemic, but that is at the front of their minds as they try to spend money and make these decisions. So how do you really convince people that this wildfire funding priority should, I don't want to say go ahead of that, but should also be a priority?
It is true. We have crisis after crisis, challenge after challenge, need after need, education, mental health, housing, transportation, the list goes on. And every single year, wildfire and the resources we need to fight these fires and to change the trajectory we're on of these catastrophic fires continues to fall below each one of those. What I keep saying to the legislature and I say to our public is, this isn't a question of whether we're going to pay for wildfires or pay for education and housing and the other critical needs our state and our people have. We're already paying for it. We're paying over $153 million a year to fight these fires. And in fact, in years like 2015, it was $300+ million. And last year in 2020, it very much exceeded 153 million. So it's not a question of whether we're going to pay for it. The question is whether we're going to pay for it to react, throwing money at smoke and flames year after year and risking loss of property and loss of lives and loss to our economy and loss to our environment. Or we're going to pay to invest up front and have those wildfire resources, do the forest restoration work, make our communities more resilient, which will reduce the overall cost year after year, not only financially and in the state's budget, but to lives and to our state and to our community.
So the big question is, what will the funding source be? You know, they're trying to figure that out kind of on the back end. Commissioner Franz says that should be hashed out in the next 2 weeks before it heads to a vote in the House. So I guess TBD. But she's probably not going to give up on this for state lawmakers. And I mean, we'll have her on the show again in 2022 and 2023 if we have to. But this is not something she's letting go of. So we'll keep following this. We'll see how long it goes. All right, coming up after the break, I could do yet another commentary about the hypocrisy of elected leaders, Ted Cruz. But instead, I want to talk about how we can better respond to our own hypocrisy. My closing commentary is next. Sometimes you really have to dig deep to discover wrongdoing on the part of politicians, but other times they make it pretty dang easy. Texas Senator Ted Cruz jetting off to Cancun during an unprecedented crisis in his state. A trip to paradise that came after he told Texans to stay home in the freezing cold, where many had no power, no water, and were running out of food. The senator warned it was dangerous to travel, all while plotting his own escape from the frigid temperatures.
And after a couple of days, after the girls being really cold, it being in the teens and the 20s outside, our girls said, look, school's been canceled for the week. Can we take a trip and go somewhere warm? And Heidi and I, as parents, we said, okay, sure.
This past year or so really seems like it's been a magnet for hypocrisy. We've done many a story on this show about Democratic leaders jetting off or getting their hair done or going out for a fancy dinner while pushing COVID lockdowns on everyone else. In fact, Ted Cruz himself called out some of those leaders. In a tweet just back in December, he called them hypocrites, complete and utter hypocrites, as he blasted the Democratic mayor of Austin for taking a private jet to Cabo, right by Cancun, while telling citizens to stay home. And look, they are hypocrites, those Democrats. And obviously, Ted Cruz is a hypocrite as well, right? Well, some of you weren't so convinced of that. On Twitter, one user wrote, "If I had a previously scheduled vacation to someplace warmer, I'd be leaving too." Well, sir, you're not a senator. Another comment from Twitter, "His kids are probably on school break and a trip was planned. Get over it." Let's get one more. "I don't blame him for getting out of town. He has nothing to do with the energy problem in Texas." Dinesh D'Souza even got in on the action, tweeting a defense of Cruz. "What could Ted Cruz do if he were here in Texas? I'm hard-pressed to say. If he's in Cancun, that means he's not using up valuable resources of energy, food, and water that can now be used by someone else. This is probably the best thing he could do for the state right now." Now look, does anyone watching truly believe for 1 second that those responses would have been the same if Cruz were a Democrat? That people now defending Senator Cruz would also defend, say, Jay Inslee, if he left our state and flew to Mexico during a once-in-a-century disaster? You all know the answer to that. The truth is that the hypocrisy of politicians often brings out our own hypocrisy. We decide whether we condone someone's behavior based not on the behavior itself, but whether the person agrees with our politics. I saw a pretty sad reminder of that locally after news of a woman shot dead in Mount Vernon after an apparent argument over a political yard sign turned violent. We were absolutely inundated with messages from people who wanted to know what politician's name was on the yard sign, as if they had to know that before deciding whether the woman deserved to lose her life. So look, we can rant and rave about the hypocrisy of elected leaders all we want, but it doesn't mean jack if we're just as bad as they are. All right, thanks so much for joining us on The Divide. I'll see you tomorrow on Q13 News This Morning.